Um, Thanks for having me along today. I don't know all of you, and all of you probably don't know me, so I'll introduce myself a little bit at the start of this. My name's Mark Layson. I'm the chaplain for aeromedical. There's a couple of us chaplains around aeromedical. My history is I was a police officer, was a firefighter. I've been an ordained Anglican priest for the last 20 years. I've been chaplain with New South Wales Ambulance for 9 years. In the last 2 years, I've left my ministry role and I'm currently doing a PhD at Charles Sturt University and with New South Wales Centre for Work Health and Safety funding part of that as well. It's about moral injury, moral distress and emergency workers. And also charting what that spiritual and religious element of it is, because it seems to be really important and integral to what's going on. So that's what I'm doing. Family-wise, married, 3 kids. The eldest one just started her HSC, so the stress in our house is, we're kind of there, but, you know, we're surviving it all. So you've gotten me this afternoon and the dog. He's going to be the light entertainment because I know this is the dead hour and I'm not sure how long I've got to go for because I'm doing a PhD, so I can talk, you know, until tomorrow morning if you want me to, and expand stuff. But I was assuming we finish at 3. I'm hoping to be well done before then, but you never know. Could be a really long one today. Just to give you a bit of an idea of what my research involves and some of the methodology to give you an understanding of what I'm trying to do. I'm about almost 2/3 of the way through. So I've done my literature review. I've done the analysis of what their particular issue is, and then I've got a multi-phase interdisciplinary approach. So I'm across the School of Theology and the School of Psychology. And so what I've done is I've read 21 biographies and autobiographies of Australian first responders and emergency medical staff. I'm doing narrative analysis of that. I've interviewed 16 of those as anonymous participants, and then I've also done a survey that I'm going to get out on social media in a little while, and I'd love people like you to fill out, which is tracking using 3 psychometrically tested scales on moral injury, moral distress, perceived injustice, and also tracking exposure to betrayal as well as trauma, because betrayal is really central to this. So it's got a bit of quant, and it's got a bit of qualitative stuff, and I do a theological reflection and build a model at the end of it that I hope everyone can be happy with, that addresses organisational culture, managerial stuff, well-being practitioners, so, you know, like the psychs, chaplains, peer supporters, what it means for them, and for workers as well, for individuals. So what you're going to get today is it's not the organisational application per se, it's an application that I'm working on for people who are working in the front line, who are actually there and perhaps are feeling kind of some of this stuff. So where I'll go today and chart today is I'm going to get someone else to explain what the moral injury thing is. Can I just have a show of hands? Who knows of moral injury, moral distress? You started to hear about that stuff? It's starting to get out there.
We were talking about it over tea just now.
Okay, cool. I heard, I didn't get to hear Jess's talk, but I saw a cracker of a question on the WhatsApp group, which I'll get Jess up later to answer. No, I won't do that. But perhaps that's one of the things that we can have a bit of a chat about. So I'm going to test something out with you, also just sort of fly the kite of where this project is going and just one particular application, what it might mean for you guys, and the way that moral injury can take people and some ways to avoid getting into bad spots with that. Some practical kind of outcomes. So I hope that's okay. And I'm very excited because a cracker of an article came out just this week and I only discovered it today. And I'm going to share some of that because you might be interested in that. So hopefully there's a bit of stats stuff, there's a bit of story stuff, there's a bit of interaction, and hopefully that'll keep us awake until 3 o'clock this afternoon. All right. Moral injury essentially arose in a military context. It was a way of understanding trauma and the bad effects of it in a slightly different way. It came from a psychiatrist, a Veterans Association psychiatrist who'd been working with Vietnam veterans for a while, and he said there's something going on. It's the distress these soldiers are feeling is not necessarily connected with trauma. Now, I use that word necessarily very loaded. It's not in the hypothetical sense of necessarily, but in that logical sense, it's not necessarily connected. It's not necessarily logically connected to the trauma. There's other things going on. Trauma is involved, but there's other causal things going on. Now, I'm going to define some terms a little bit later. But the essence of it is what I'm finding, what I'll show you lots of research is finding, is that element of that feeling of betrayal, either by your organisation, your managers, or even yourself or the general public. The research has been booming, the moral injury research in healthcare workers during COVID, and the article that I found today is in that context as well. So there's some interesting stuff that we're going to be able to get through. I'm going to show you a video. This is Dr. William Nash. He's a clinical and research psychiatrist at the Veterans Affairs in Los Angeles. He is a health sciences associate clinical professor at UCLA. He leads research and treatment programs for veterans with moral injury, and he works in areas of prevention and recognition of moral injury. He's also served as the Director of Psychological Health for the US Marine Corps, so he's seen active service with them. He was one of the first psychs to go over with the Marine Corps over to Iraq. He is getting down, he's a secularist guy. He's a psychiatrist, and he is one of the co-authors of the foundational scholarly article in 2009 that he co-authored with a few others, Brett Litz and a few others. And so he's right in the middle of the game of this. Now, this is about 10 minutes long, but it's actually really interesting to give you a bit of an oversight of what moral injury is. And we're going to see if the volume is actually going to work. Let's see.
I just hate the troubleshoot. Of course not.
No.
Okay, let's see what we can do.
See what we can do?
There's no audio there at all?
There's no audio there at all.
Let's go down to the... how do I minimise that on your screen?
No, I just escape.
Okay. It is going there, isn't it? We'll just go to speakers and play it, and we'll...
Okay, let's see what we can do. Let's try again. Don't do that to me.
Spinning Wheel of Death.
To make the wounded whole. Moral injury is damage to a person from experiencing something that violates deeply held moral expectations. And moral expectations are something that, although ministers and theologians and philosophers have been interested in for a long, long time, it's kind of a new thing for healthcare professionals and other caregivers to consider. They're really, moral expectations are right at the very core of who we are as people and who we are as societies. It's what we build our lives on. It's what matters. It's what we value. It's what we love. It's our system of love. And we love the things that we look up to and work toward, and are willing to serve, and in some cases die for. And I think there's good evidence that we are all hardwired from before birth to try to embody goodness, morality, love, compassion, empathy, caring. We all know that those are the right things. They give us joy. And if life were lived somewhere other than here on this very earthly planet, maybe we could pull that off for a lifetime. But of course nobody can. Of course life brings us to our knees over and over again because we can't always meet our own moral expectations, and others can't always meet our moral expectations. And then the challenge is, okay, now what? Now what? How do we make sense out of that? How do we regroup after that? How do we go on? And you know, a lot of moral injuries are just kind of little bruises, kind of twinges. You know, I did something or somebody did something to me, and you get angry about it for a while, and then you kind of shrug it off, and it's out. You know, it's just life. But then there are other moral injuries that are profound and devastating. And in having conversations about moral injury, that's important for people to kind of be aware that there is that spectrum. As somebody who's served with the Marine Corps and in war zones and in the aftermath of that, you know, as others who've served in prisons are aware, you know, there are significant numbers of people who've had these profound moral injuries, and that's a real challenge of how to rebuild. Rita Nakashima-Brock, who is one of the leaders of this great training seminar, uses the term rebuilding the house as a metaphor for recovering, repairing after moral injury. I think it's a really good metaphor. And one of the things this training here, this seminar was built on is the awareness that moral injury is part of the human condition. It's something all people experience. It is not a medical thing. It's not a healthcare thing. It's not a religious thing. It's not a spiritual thing. It's not a literary thing, an artistic thing, or a poetic thing, but it's all of those things. And that humanness is defined by all those different perspectives and through all those different lenses. And I will fight for the rest of my career to not let healthcare professionals, even though I am one, not let healthcare professionals try to co-opt this moral injury thing as a healthcare issue, because that will not do any of us any good. That the people who I have met and talked to over the years who have had the best outcomes after a severe moral injury, who've come through that hero's journey, come out of the wilderness with this new wisdom that they bring to others, it's almost always because of relationships, because somebody listened to them, really listened, was able to hear sometimes some pretty horrible, horrific truths without becoming disgusted, without judging, without turning away, and then giving the person who spoke the greatest gift that we can offer, and that is to say, I hear you, I believe you, but I still love you. And for the person to believe that, it can't really be a helping professional like me who's paid to come in and, you know, give you 50 minutes of an hour, next. You know, sometimes people can suspend disbelief about genuine love and caring, and I believe I genuinely do love and care for the people I serve. But how much easier when there's already a relationship and they already know that this person they're talking to really does care about them. you don't need to have any special skill to provide this service. And we've been doing it forever. We just haven't had the language. We just haven't had the words to communalize these experiences, and then to study, to research and find out really what works and what doesn't. And that's, kind of where we're at now. Finally, this is exploding worldwide, and it's changing people's attitudes about so many things, because there's this realization, this acknowledgement, even among our senior military leaders, which I'm just so delighted about, that moral injury is real. It is one of the things that can happen to people in bad situations. And in the military, if we're going to create bad situations by prosecuting wars, by deploying into ugly situations, even if it's humanitarian missions, we have to do it with our eyes open, knowing that we're going to be putting people in positions where they're going to be vulnerable to and at risk for moral injury. And it's our duty, it is our duty to do what we can to prevent that, to recognize it, to help people move on, rebuild, heal, to create goodness where we have created evil. And so I think one of the really hopeful things to me about this, these last 3 days here, is that there's so many different voices, poetic voices, and song and music and art and literature and philosophy and religion, theology, and a little bit of psychiatry. So it's very encouraging for me, and I think this is the kind of conversations we need to have more of, with inclusion and seeing the big picture, so we can. That's the other thing about moral injury as a concept that's made me very proud, actually, to be part of this conversation, is that it's become a linking concept. It has created, it's drawn a circle in which all these different points of view, these different walks of life can converge and say, this is our common ground, this is our common space. That's exciting, and we need more conversations like this. To provide this an offer, and that is to say,
all right. I wanted to show you Bill, because Bill Nash is one of the key figures of this around the world. He's really well thought out, and he's been doing it for a while, and actually really actively involved and been in the front lines and all that kind of stuff. Some of the issues that Bill talks about that Dr. Nash will talk about, we'll get to that in a little while, but I just want to unpack it a little bit more, some of the technical stuff for you about what moral injury is. I'll try not to be too techie, because it's, as I said, it's the afternoon. Some of the things that Dr. Nash alluded to is essentially there's two real elements of moral injury, and the two major definitions, which we'll get into a little while. One is when you feel you've done something you're ashamed of. You haven't followed procedure, someone has a bad outcome. You knew you should have done it, you've made the mistake. You've done something that you promised that you never would do in your naive days at medical college. You said, I'm never going to, insert X there, let someone die in the back of my ambulance. It's one of the guys said in one of the books. And then someone dies in the back of your ambulance and you feel like a failure. Whether or not you are, the objective reality of it is quite often less important than the perception that you hold with it. So that's one element of it. The other element of it is that organisational betrayal, that feeling that someone higher up has betrayed you. And now that goes actually all the way up, and I'm going to show you a great graph from some recent research. It's yet to be published, on the way that different members of the medical fraternity feel and understand betrayal and where they feel it's coming from, because it's a little bit different. The other thing about moral injury right at this outset is it sits in the world of PTSD, but it's different. I love it when people produce articles where you don't need to read the article to get the whole thesis. This article is moral injury and PTSD, often co-occurring, yet mechanistically different. It's using functional MRI technology to show the different areas of the brain that are functioning when you've got a guilt response versus a fear response. And that's really the difference between PTSD and moral injury. PTSD is a lot about... Come here. Hey. Oh, place. Good boy. PTSD is about fear. It's about the world is not a safe place. Moral injury is more about guilt and shame, and the world is not a fair place. PTSD is about now and the future. Moral injury ruminates on the things in the past, okay? The things that were and how that's affecting you, but it has significant effects on you. This shows a little bit of what I'm talking about. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that properly. This is Nikki Jamison, who's University of New England, has just finished her doctorate in suicidality in the military and moral injury. Just outline some of the differences between symptoms for PTSD and moral injury. We could look at that all day. You can see there's a lot of overlap there, but what I really want to think about today, these are things about identity, existentially focused symptoms, emotional impacts of not feeling worthy or good, grief, sorrow, regret, feeling betrayed, self-blame, guilt and shame. And so there's lots of different ways I could go today. I can try and do all of them, but I want to sort of narrow in on what that looks like and how it manifests itself in people in an unhelpful way, and some tactics to think about it coming up. So the shame and guilt and anger and even outrage are those things that are really important. So today what I want us to do is actually do a bit of existential thinking. Now, you don't have to be a French philosopher with a beautiful supermodel downing a crepe on the Champs-Elysees to really consider existential things. To think a little bit bigger, to think about what Bill was talking about in that video, your moral expectations. So often we don't make these explicit. We have ones thrust upon us externally. You've got, 4 principles of bioethics that are thrust upon you regardless of what you feel about things. And I was thinking about those as I looked at that question. How do those 4 principles of bioethics help you answer the question that was posed? Do they? Do they answer it for you? Do they answer it for you personally, deep down? And that's what we're going to really think about is who am I? What makes me tick? The reason I want to do this, Dr. Peter Dean Baker from the University of New South Wales says people who join the military need to clearly understand their moral framework and belief system, because humans are better able to cope with morally challenging environments when we understand who we are. And he goes on to say that's the difference between an individual who returns from deployment morally injured and an individual who returns unharmed. Maybe whether they can answer the question, what do I really believe? Who am I? Where do I belong? And what is my purpose? Now, the article that's quoted in, the soldiers at Kapuka don't really get that in their basic military training. I'm sure at Sydney University or wherever you trained, that was part of it, your purpose in life and why you've done this kind of stuff. Maybe not. It certainly doesn't happen at Rozelle when they train paramedics. I don't know if it's something that you've ever considered, who you are. And because what I'm going to get you to do is to just jot down for a few minutes, either on your phone or on a piece of paper or something, some of the initial answers to that question, who you are and what you stand for. And that's a bigger framework by which you start answering those other smaller questions like the one put up there before. And I want to tell you that morals are different to ethics. Ethics are codified. They're presented as public statements for us to be able to have a way of operating with people in what one guy calls thin relationships. The guy that's walking down the street, the next patient that you've got, people that you're associates with, they guide that kind of action. Morals guide you in your thick relationships, the ones in which you rely on other people. You have an affiliation that's deeper. The three traditional betrayals were treason against your nation, heresy against right thinking, and adultery against the one that you've made a vow to be with. It's those kind of deep, thick relationships that are broken, and that are what goes on with our morality. And so morality, in that original paper, Litz and Nash and others, it's the personal, shared, familial, cultural, societal, and legal rules social behaviour, tacit or explicit. There are fundamental assumptions about how things should work and how one should behave in the world. And should is really important for the way we form ourselves, but it's also one of the most dangerous things for our well-being sometimes, when we can't let go of should.
Raj is looking after me. She said to her, Jodie gets...
Apologies.
That's all right.
We had to unmute everyone before, and they should know better, but no, sometimes.
That's all right.
Kids today. That's salty. Good.
Excellent. Fantastic. That's all right. So I'm going to get you to write down shortly for yourself what you think your moral framework is, at least the start of it. And just as a bit of an example, I'm going to tell you my shoulds, what I think the world should, what it means for me. Now, this isn't me most days. This is me on my best day. This is what I want to believe about myself, which I would feel upset if it was damaged. So I value loyalty, honesty, self-discipline, though I so often lack it, particularly with chocolate. I value self-reflection, the ability to be able to, when criticised, sit back and go, okay, perhaps I resemble those comments just a little bit, and to be able to reflect on them. I value mercy and justice. I don't want to throw someone under a bus. And I don't want to be thrown under a bus. That's why I like loyalty. I want to be able to say what I mean and mean what I say. I have an allergy against organisational bullcrap. It fills me with dread so often. I like listening deeply to people when they attack me and reflect on it rather than attack back. I aspire to be a person who's gracious and forgiving and strong. You'd hope that in a chaplain anyway, wouldn't you? Forgiving and strong, things we don't put together. When I was a police officer, I did actually say to a few offenders, don't mistake kindness for weakness, because I can and I will crush you, but I'm going to be kind to you. Because one of the reasons I want is because when I reflect back, I go, actually, that's so often me. I'm wrong. I could see people sit in the dock sometimes and go, there, but for the grace of God, go I. A good mate of mine bought McDonald's for a junkie who he was charging, and everyone else bagged him out for it. He said, hang on, she hasn't made this choice to do that, to be in this and doing, break and enters. There's a passage here. She's just human, and I want to recognise that. And, so often I see that, my background has led me to a much better place, because if I'd have been brought up in the Kibera slum in Kenya, there's no way I'd be where I am today, and I'm very thankful for that. For me, I dislike three different kinds of personalities: bullies, sycophants, and show-offs. I find that really hard. But I think the world is unfair and it's broken. And many people, when they think that, they go off to a monastery to contemplate that. I think Henri Blocher, a French theologian, wrote that evil's not there to be considered and pondered, it's there to be fought. And so I want to fight a good, clean fight and to be able to be something good in the world. And so my overall thing is I want to leave something better, just a bit better than I found it. Whether it's the house that I rent, or whether it's the classroom I go and teach something in, or the place that I'm at, I want to try and leave something a bit better. So that's me on my best day. That's my character. They're my moral expectations, and that's what makes me me. If I were to lose these, I would lose me. So I want you to just take a little bit of time to think about what that is. And as you do that, I'm going to just put up a quote here from ICU doctor about this difference between these bioethics and your moral framework. Ken Hillman writes, I reflect on the irrelevance of the 4 principles of beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy and distributive justice. They are little help when considering withdrawing and withholding treatment, futility, dying, heroic measures, explanations, transparency, honesty and compassion. So, with that ringing in your ears, take a few minutes and just have a bit of a think. Maybe text yourself or do something like that and start to flesh out what that would look like. And I'm going to come back to why this is really, really important in a little while down there. So take a few minutes. Yeah, you can put you put the deepest things about you in the WhatsApp group. I was at this point going to play a song, just some background music. Will you sleep?
Google just told me that to that level.
Ah, yeah.
Now my children get onto my Spotify. It's very. See, I've got a moral injury playlist. I've got an aeromedical list. I didn't know what to listen to when I came today. Here we go. A bit of passenger. How about a bit of Passenger? Oh no, actually, this is what I was going to play. What do you think?
When you got nothing, freewheeling and free falling, you go. When you got nothing, you got something to do. Then you get something that you've always dreamed about. When you got something, you got something to do. You take everything. They take your smile, they take everything. They break your heart, they take everything. Oh, 'cause nothing's ever something until you lose everything. For a while you got everything. You're flying high, you don't wanna calm down. But something stirs out in your soul. 'Cause everything is nothing till you got somebody to share with, somebody to have, somebody to hold. Give them everything. Give them light in the dark, give them everything. Give them all your heart, give them everything. Yeah, 'cause nothing's ever something until you give everything. Nothing lasts forever. There was something to never change.
There you go. I've taken Dr. Nash's advice. It's a bit of music, it's a bit of thinking, it's a bit of moral imagination and reflection. I love that Passenger song. Until you've got something, no one can take something away from you. And it feels once you give everything to something, you're far more vulnerable. Particularly if you give your heart and your soul to something, whether it be to a person or even to your career. And so many people go into caring careers and they give of themselves and who they are. And you open yourself in a new way to something, these moral injuries in a deeper kind of way. Now, what I want you to do with that is one thing, and then we're going to get kind of techie and nerdy here. Write down next to it how much you would sell that to someone for. Sell who you are for. Okay, don't write it. Imagine how much would it cost for you to compromise that? How much would you be willing to sell that for? For many of you, you don't sell your morals, your soul to someone. I bet most of you would say it's not for sale. But here's one of my theses. Something that you would not sell, you will willingly give away to someone that you hate. And that's the bad place that moral injury takes people. Something that is you, that you would not sell for $1 million, you would willingly give away to someone that you hate. And that's morally dangerous. Okay, so hold that thought. And we'll get a little bit techie, and I'll get back into my slides here, and we shall do a bit of moral injury defining. Okay, so these are the two basic definitions of moral injury and one of moral distress. Moral injury, it says 2014 from Shea, but really 1996 was when he wrote the book Achilles in Vietnam, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But he had three elements of it. Betrayal of what's right by someone in legitimate authority in a high-stakes situation, thinking in particular in the Vietnam context. William Nash and Letts and a few others in 2009. They went slightly different way. You can see these are the two different views of what's going on with moral injury, and guess which ones the military likes more? The lasting psychological, biological, spiritual, behavioural and social impacts of perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. Well, the military and organisations like that a lot more because that's putting it back on you. You've done something, okay? It's not us, it's you, and we need to be able to help you. Actually, both the elements are really true. They're different sides of the same coin, if you want. And moral distress is a bit of an outlier, and that's why I'm trying to work out how it fits, because people are saying it is. And this arose in a nursing context. When you know the right thing to do, but institutional constraints make it nearly impossible to pursue that course of action, that you can be pushed and shoved into making a decision that you don't feel comfortable with. And it's not necessarily about ethics, it's about your moral framework, which everyone here will have a slightly different one here. You'll have elements that are very similar. But what is really central and important, and I'm going to show you in some of the literature that's coming out at the moment, and including my research as well, some of the early stuff I've got coming back. When ethics are broken, it's legal, isn't it? If you have an ethical breach that you can go before professional standards or the medical board or whoever it is, when your morals are broken, it's a betrayal. A betrayal is one of those things that is... for centuries has been considered the most serious of crimes. You know, Dante's Divine Comedies, he travels through the 9 circles down to the very pit of hell, and he goes through avarice and lust and greed until he gets to the very bottom of hell, and there are the betrayers. That was seen as the most heinous crime in Dante's day. And there was Brutus, brutally stabbing in the back Julius Caesar, sitting in Dante's bottom of his, not ice inferno, but just icy down the bottom of Dante's hell. Then you've got Brutus. You've got Judas betraying with a kiss. And this one you won't know, probably. Does anyone know this one? This is Achilles being betrayed by Agamemnon, his superior commander. You don't know it, but Achilles in the Iliad is betrayed by his commander. He has won a prize of war, the beautiful Bracis, and she is stolen from him wrongfully by Agamemnon. And it all just goes to custard from there, particularly once Achilles' best friend is killed in battle. And he goes from this ethical soldier to this one who would desecrate bodies of his enemies and drag them around behind his chariot. And it's there that moral injury kind of started. Jonathan Shea, psychiatrist with veterans, goes back and goes, actually, what I'm reading here from these veterans is actually the experience of Achilles. And that sense of betrayal that Vietnam veterans felt. You know, they were so morally compromised. The whole reason for war, they came home, they were spat on. They had all kinds of things. You know, the things like the new M16 that they had. It was a terrible weapon. and they felt betrayed that their government would send them into battle with something that so often backfired. Or they would have, it was Vietnam, and there's been some great research, that the amount of colonels that were killed in action in Vietnam compared to all the wars preceding, it's all of a sudden the colonels are in the background. You know, there were helicopters watching them, and the colonels were in the helicopters watching the helicopters go to battle. They were so distant from their troops, and there was lots of other different things. But this real sense of betrayal. Nikki Jamison, who's been writing in the military context, she's saying actually it's betrayal is the very central element of it. Now, this is some research that Dr. Nick Greenberg, who's at King's College, this isn't yet published, but I've been in contact with him to ask if I can use it. He's on holidays. He said he's going to get back to me. So if he could not take photos of this, I'd really appreciate it. He's half given me permission, if you know what I mean. So here is the percentage of people. This is moral injury in mental health and mental health disorders, particularly around healthcare workers in the COVID environment in England. And how they might feel betrayed. MIES is the moral injury events. I get them mixed up because Bill Nash wrote the MIES, and I'll show you the scale in a little while in some research that came out this week. But anyway, when people feel morally injured, more often than not, you can see that it correlates here. So blue is PTSD, orange is alcohol misuse, manic depressive, I think it is, and burnout. This sense of betrayal, rather than doing an act yourself or an omission, these are the things that have a greater correlation with all of those other things. These are the comorbidities that go with moral injury. This is why it's significant, because you cross those boundaries, this kind of stuff kind of follows. So that's the relationship with other things. Now, this is a really interesting one here. The blue columns are doctor. The orange columns are nurse. The grey is other clinical, and the yellow is non-clinical. You can see there are spikes. So number one is I saw things that were morally wrong, those kinds of things. This is from the scale. I'm troubled having witnessed other immoral acts. So witnessing other people do stuff. The stuff in the middle here, I'm troubled by having acted in ways that violated my own moral code. Some of those down the bottom there are less significant, those kinds of things. But the ones here, 7, I feel betrayed by my supervisors, managers who I once trusted. Now, nurses feel that more than doctors. Nurses, maybe. Doctors, right on the right-hand side, I feel betrayed by others outside of the health service who I once trusted. Nick Greenberg was saying nurses feel betrayed by those who are further up who have the power over them to force them into morally distressing situations. Doctors feel it about hospital administrators. That was the take-home that he said about this slide and why he pointed those out. Both felt senses of betrayal. Am I right? Is this literature kind of right? To it? Yeah. I won't go down that rabbit hole. There's a. In my research as well, what I'm trying to track is when you've witnessed other people do stuff, when you've done stuff, or when you felt betrayed. This is just my first stuff. It's the first very small group of people who I've asked to do this. People, if you can have a look there, nearly 20% of people feel they were betrayed by their managers 50 to 100 times during their career. More than being a victim of trauma, so this is across emergency services, police, fire, ambulance and medical, there's a greater degree of feeling betrayed than there is actually being a victim of trauma. So they're the criterion A catalogues for trauma in the first question. So you've got that stuff going on there. So I've been using some of the scales, one that's created by Joe Courier, the EMIS scale, the Expressions of Moral Injury scale. But it's showing me that actually betrayal, these different things from that were the highest responses I got to it. The moral failures I witnessed as a first responder have left a bad taste in my mouth. My experiences as a first responder have caused me to seriously doubt the motives of people in authority. I feel anger over being betrayed by someone I had trusted while I worked as a first responder. So there were the responses within my research that were the highest ones, those feelings of betrayal. And so this is why I'm saying betrayal is so very, very important. There's that information about that. Actually, I want to show you this really cool article. It's only been released this week. So these are these kind of questions here. Can people see that? You can see these are the top questions here, the transgressions by others, self-transgressions, and those feelings of betrayal. You can see the percentages here in the percentage of respondents in brackets here, so N350, but percentage of those kinds of things are here. That self-betrayal is less of an issue in this particular context. It's still real and there, but these are people who agreed with that at baseline N30 and then day 90. So what you can see here is a particular maintenance of that feeling of betrayal by others. But here's where it gets quite interesting as well. It's correlation with generalised anxiety, with suicidal ideation, and PHQ. I've only read it today, so I've forgotten what PHQ stands for. Is the patient health questionnaire, sorry. Correlations with significant stuff. Now, exposure to COVID here is also measured. And that exposure to COVID is if you got it or a close family loved one got it. There's very small, significant, but small correlations here. But you have a look at it in being betrayed. What it's doing in terms of comorbidity with these other different elements, this idea of betrayal and where it goes. So you can see it goes in bad places for people. And so this moral injury element, this sense of being betrayed, is something really central to our general well-being and our health. And that's why it's really worth us having a bit of a look at it. So here's the practical stuff. This is the so what. This is out of a book that's just been released this year called Anger on Work, particularly in austere environments, emergency services. It's an Australian production. And what it brings is this kind of cycle. You can see it at the top there. Heightened sensitivity to betrayal and injustice and shame are raised when these things happen. Then mild or ambiguous stimuli are interpreted as a betrayal. Now, if you're sitting in a managerial position, you can probably see the piece of people below you when you make a decision that has absolutely, you've followed the 4 ethics of biomedicine and you've done everything for beneficence, and someone still says you're trying to screw us. Yeah? That heightened sense that even something ambiguity is going on there. Anger is triggered. Ambiguous evidence is interpreted as real by the time we're at the bottom left there, and then a renewed experience of betrayal and injustice, and the cycle goes round and round. And this manifests itself in the way that people do their work. So this is one of the scenarios that she gives in the book, and it's really interesting. I'll read it to you and what it looks like down the road, and see if you can recognise it in yourself or others in the workplace. So it's a policing scenario, but the second part of it is what I'm really interested in. So Phil, a police sergeant with a junior officer alongside him, was in pursuit of an armed offender. They located the offender in a parked vehicle in a multi-storey car park. It was unclear whether the offender still had a weapon. Phil was in communication with his commanding officer back at the station. Phil advised the senior sergeant that the offender was not posing any immediate threat, and he proposed to wait for backup vehicle to arrive before confronting the offender. The senior sergeant was concerned that a delay would increase the risk of the offender escaping and ordered Phil to go in immediately. Phil and his junior partner left the car and proceeded to the vehicle under the cover of other parked cars. The offender got out of the car and saw them. The offender immediately put up his hands in the air. Phil called, "Hold fire," to his partner, but in fear his partner fired 3 shots in quick succession and killed the offender. The partner was subsequently charged for his actions and left the police force. Phil felt betrayed by the senior sergeant, who did not accept his recommendation for the course of action and harbours intense anger that has pervaded his career since. Phil has refused promotion, having a complete mistrust of anyone in a senior leadership position. He is constantly cynical about the actions of police hierarchy and interprets any error of judgment as a deliberate betrayal. He has been called before disciplinary hearings on multiple occasions for insubordinate and aggressive behaviour. Now put that into your kind of jargon. You want to make a decision, you're overruled by someone, it leads to something bad, and then you feel then that anger. And can you that anger and that cynicism about everything. They go on to say that Phil has developed a deep-seated mistrust of anyone in authority or leadership position, now carries an expectation of further betrayal, and he has a heightened sensitivity to this occurring. When a change in policy on interactions with the media is introduced, Phil immediately concludes that this new policy is designed to protect the reputation of senior management rather than assist members on the ground, triggering a cynical anger response fuelled by the thought that the rank and file are again being blamed for the mistakes of the past. Does any of that ring true to people that you work with? That every decision is made, the default position is we're getting screwed here somehow. And there's that anger and that cynicism, and it's that level of anger and cynicism that you see here at work. Imagine what they do when they take it home. And it's destructive to you and to your family. In fact, one of the reasons they've done this whole book on anger is the single biggest symptom that prevents treatment from working. Evidence-based treatments do not work for PTSD or anything else when there's significant levels of anger, or very rarely do. And it's this sense of betrayal that sits right at the heart of it. So imagine it's you. You've come to work, you've given over and over again. This isn't just a job for you, it's actually something about who you are, an expression of who you are. And you live out your moral code, and you do that with great satisfaction. You regularly do unpaid overtime at great cost to your family life, which is becoming increasingly strained. You take calls at ridiculous hours. You put yourself at physical risk in the middle of the night doing things to help other people. And then you get a complaint made about you. You're not even consulted in the investigation to give your side. And it's like swimming in treacle to try and get any understanding of where the spurious investigation is even at, or what the whole substance of the investigation is. Or you get an injury, or after 20 years you make an error and you've never made this mistake before. And instead of trying to find the circumstances that led to it, it's like the Nuremberg trial, and we're going to try and hang someone here. And that's the way, so often, unfortunately, our professional standards work. We want to find who's to blame, not what went wrong. And in all of that, you've given all of this stuff to people. A hospital administrator, a registrar, a senior manager, and makes the dumbest of decisions that limits your ability to do your job effectively after all you've done. You feel betrayed. And then you utter these words either out loud or in your head, and you go, well, why would I continue doing that if that's the way they're going to treat me? Boom. You just sold what you held most dear and would not sell for anything. You just gave it away to someone you hated. At that moment you go, when you say, why would I do that when this is the way they treat me? Well, if that you are acting under your moral code, you are putting in extra time because that's the person you are. You let that person limit you being the person that you want to be. And so it's being able to prevent that slide of character and activity where you go down and you can justify almost any action. I'm not going to check the packs today. Screw it, I didn't get my overtime. I've got to work Christmas. We can worry about that another time. Someone else will do it. And you stop being the person that you are. And you've sold that thing that you wanted. If you really did all these things for recognition, then it's probably not part of your moral code. It's actually, I do all these things because I have an expectation. I have a moral expectation that they're going to pay me back. They're going to see me. And so often, the things we feel most betrayed by are the unwritten contracts that we make with the organisation and the managers. If I work hard, if I do this, I will get this. And then you don't get this, and you feel betrayed. And then you build up that feeling of resentment that what you had expected to happen didn't happen, and you feel betrayed. And then you have a heightened sense of it, and everything is read through that grid length of that. Now, I'm not saying that's anyone in this room or everyone in this room. It's possibly someone in this room, but I will put money on it. It's someone that you know at work. Someone within your world is in that spot. And this is what Kevin Gilmartin, he wrote a book a number of years ago called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And he talks about that moment when you swap your personal ethic for a situational ethic. I'm normally like this, but now I'm like this. because they made me do it. And here I think is what the slide is down. First of all, you enter one of these jobs, as a nurse or a paramedic or a doctor, and you're very principled in what you do. And you think this is the best job ever. And then something happens, one of those little betrayals, like Dr. Nash said, it's just like a little bruise. And you go, oh my goodness, okay, I better be careful. Maybe it's not all as I thought.
That's just the way we're going.
Okay. No worries.
Hopefully the paycheck.
Yeah.
Check on that.
And then it moves to cynicism and go, oh yeah, that's the way it happens around here. That's going to happen. And then it goes to resentment. And you're actually not only just a cynical about it, you actually resent every decision. And when it comes in, you can almost see the physical signs of that anger, clenched fists or tightened muscles at every decision that comes. And then it comes to the most dangerous spot, entitlement. Because they've done this, I'm justified in doing this. And we lose ourselves in the battle. I feel this too. I reflect on my days in policing, and I've had to apply this to understand my own source of annoyance at the way I felt I was treated when I left the police of my own right. I'd got to this. So I'm saying this because I actually want to be able to resonate with you and feel like I'm not pointing fingers here. This is actually me. I joined the police, and when I was, just before I left, I was second highest on arrest rate at our station. I was putting the most intelligence reports in. I was one of the 2 training officers that we trained all the probationary constables in Sydney District. I was part of the riot and crowd control that they'd started up because they'd banned the TRG and they had to do something. So I used to do that, and I was the senior person within our station doing that. I was running the T Fund. I was the chairman of the police association, etc., etc. And then they chased me for $200 when I left. I've overtaken annual leave, and I thought, the jerks! After all I put in, they want to chase me for this, and I pushed them as long as I could when I was, mid-20s, because I was so bitterly offended that they hadn't taken up their part of the deal that they never made with me. I was so bitterly offended, and so I've had to really try and think through that. So I'm going to finish with a few different thoughts. Has anyone got any questions or thoughts or anything they wanted to put out there? Because I've got a few sort of practical things to finish off to think through, to put before you. Not as commands, but as suggestions in a little while.
I mean, no one here has any moral issues because they've been treated so nicely by the manager, and so they only have loving stories to tell. But there's certainly, big organisations by definition kind of act in ways that are like psychopaths. Like there's lots of books talking about how companies and in the end behave very poorly to the people around them, the universe around them, because they're kind of designed to do so. And I reflect on Northern Beaches, where I was one of the docs that started at Northern Beaches in the first few weeks. And my God, that place was a nightmare. Just an absolute and utter disaster. And you turn off work, and there'd be no one know anything, the IT system didn't work, and you felt completely betrayed. Like, you really felt like you've been set up to kill someone, and they're just going to laugh all the way to the bank because it's a private company. Now, no one really deliberately tried to set us up, but it just was so frustrating that there was such a betrayal that this organisation, who should be able to run an emergency department, just couldn't get its act together and hadn't put the effort in and put the time. And we're putting the patients at risk, and it was our names on the patients. And that felt really nasty. And I've almost forgotten. Almost. And then, I'll get a shift, and it'll be half the number of staff that should be there, and it's late at night, and we're stuck there till 2 in the morning because there's not enough staff and people are waiting, and it comes back. You go, yeah. I feel like no one's listening, and there's nothing we can do about it because it's COVID universe and we can't put any extra staff on. And I know the director really would do something if it was possible, but the organisation is quite happy to have the fact that this isn't being solved. And so that for me is the kind of moral injury that I kind of experienced. But compared to watching someone get murdered in front of me, I think it's pretty minor. And I can choose to work there or not. And if I really had such a big deal, I could just walk away. And I think to some degree we're kind of lucky in that respect as doctors. We're very portable. And if we can't fix the place, we can't stand the place, we can leave. And, if we stand there and stay there and are unhappy for the rest of our career, then kind of it's on us. To some degree.
That definition of moral distress you put up, that's the job description for the UK NHS. In the UK NHS, that's the job description.
Yeah.
And that's why there's lots of work going on over there. King's College are doing a lot of that stuff. That stuff is going to be published.
In some ways, it's almost emergency medicine.
It is.
I'm constantly asked to try and manage things that could be done better, but the organisation hasn't worked out how to do it. And nothing to do with me, nothing to do with people I work with, but the rest of the hospital. Oh, they don't take patients after hours because it's the ward. And, oh, no, there's only 7 patients. You can only take 3 patients in ICU, even though you go up there and they all seem to be sitting and drinking tea and we're all running around. It's that kind of institutional frustrations. And you just, and if you let it get you down and think about it too much, you can really quite.
And the one thing about your response to that, Carl, is you never complain.
But I learned from it, that's the thing. Got to learn.
Say something similar that I've seen in the places I've worked. Similar sorts of feeling of betrayal with COVID pandemic was feelings around PPE provision in some of the places that I've been, and I think staff have been quite upset going on about their jobs and not felt supported by the institution in terms of fit testing and having supply of N95 masks. We were sort of told a lot in the place that I am that we had to really conserve them. We could only use them in very specific situations. Nurses were actively discouraged from using them, and that created a lot of hurt and betrayal, and you could see it affecting how people worked. Very high stakes time.
And that's really interesting. Some research came out of Charles Sturt University this year about distress in an Australian context in first responders and medical people, and the top 5, none of them, like that research shows, it wasn't actually catching COVID, wasn't the thing that was going to be comorbid with getting PTSD. It was these organisational factors, and it was increased workload, protective equipment, the 5 things, the kind of the VUCA environment, communication, and lack of management at the coalface. They were the 5 most distressing things, and those are the things that are comorbid with all those other elements. So it's not strictly the trauma stuff. So it's difficult, but I'm giving you the worker perspective. I'm speaking next week at the National Work Health and Safety Colloquium, and I'm going to give the organisational, or the first part of the organisational response, what needs to happen, particularly around leadership and psychosocial risk and what that looks like. But for us, we could talk about them and the way they've got to change. But there is a way that I think there's some tactics and techniques that you could possibly use to be able to help you now that you can recognise this environment and see what's happening. That you possibly are swimming in what is an environment that's toxic to your well-being. How can you actually manage that?
Just on the flip side of that, I think as humans, we do also sometimes look for external factors when something doesn't go to plan. And I think it can be easy to fixate on the next person above you or the next level above you that this was an issue with this. And that happens at every single level. Even the very most senior people will look for something else above them that kind of causes problem. And how do you kind of reconcile that, or do you have any strategies for kind of how you isolate that and not get kind of because there are certain times when actually I look at a situation and go, actually, I need to take personal responsibility for this. But I think that can be a real challenge sometimes.
I mean, look, one of the most helpful things I've found in life is it's always someone else's fault. It's never my fault. And that's that, when I look back at mine and as I've had to, I've been able to cheat as I thought about my moral code, that idea of self-reflection and introspection, to be able to have that. I think a few of those different elements to be able to go, okay, perhaps it is someone else's fault, but what happens in that cycle that's there is you're attuned already because you already believe you've been suffering, and perhaps you have been in the past, and you bring that into the current situation. Is to be able to find, how do I deal with this situation? And part of it in the healthcare situation is, if I admit it's my fault, I'm the bottom of the food chain, and then I'm the one they're going to hang around. So that's organisational kind of stuff that can make that fearful as well, because we don't want to admit to fault because we've seen our colleagues get in trouble for admitting it. I think there's one of the best things that you can do in your coffees and cases is when you all hear the things that have gone wrong and you actually take it as a learning point. That's a really important thing, to have a safe environment. So here's a few things that I'm thinking, see if it happens. You've been able to recognise who you are and what you stand for and not give it away for anything. And that's the baseline of it, to be able to revisit who you are and go, I'm not going to let them live in my head rent-free, choosing my decisions for me because they did this, I did this. And we not only blame other people, we justify our poor actions. And to be able to have that time. So a few things that you need to, I think, that are really helpful and important to do that. This involves broken social trust. You need someone, I think, who knows your language and who you trust is possibly outside of your workplace. That, as Dr. Nash says, we can help each other a lot. Perhaps it's not someone here at the base, but it's a fellow doctor. One of the best things that happened when I joined the police, the guy who would be my best man, and I was his best man, we both joined the police at the same time. And we'd have a deck session. And we didn't know what we were doing at the time. We were informally debriefing each other. And without that judgment or disgust or whatever, to be able to go, when I think about it, I probably did this. And they're not going to judge you, they're not going to hang around your neck. You find somewhere in which you can have social trust. Someone who's in your career. One of the things that Nash talked about, Nash and Litz in their original thing, is having a benevolent moral authority to be able to talk to. And they imagine that you're talking to an empty chair and someone forgiving you for doing the wrong thing. Some of us chaplains are going, well, actually, we're kind of good with guilt and forgiveness stuff, so perhaps, we're a person that you can speak to. So it doesn't necessarily need to be pathologised, but that regaining of social trust is a really important element of it. I think draw lines around what you do. You know what you're doing and why you're doing it. When I reflect back on my police time, I want to do it because that was the person I was. But I also had to recognise, there's a great saying, don't cast your pearls before swine. There's a point at which you can draw your line and go, I don't need to take this. Or I'm going to draw the line. I'm still going to do my thing and I'm not going to let them change the way I do it. But I'm drawing lines and boundaries that are really, really important about how far I will give before I feel that hurt and pain. And even having other avenues outside of work that help you with your identity and who you are to be able to express that element of who you are. Whether it's volunteering for the local surf lifesaving club or it's whatever else that you do, if that's your only avenue by which you express, and that's the problem I think with our careers sometimes, is they're so overwhelming ontologically that you become that. I always say I was a policeman and a fireman. I know I'm not allowed to say man anymore, but a policeman and a fireman. Ontologically, you don't have an accountant man. They were really jobs that you were. If you can actually share your identity in other places as well and find places to express stuff like that. Notice that slide when you're becoming resentful. If you've got a loved one at home that you can go, look, I've just thought about this and I know that I'd probably project some of my anger back here at home, and they'll go, oh no dear, you're never angry at home, I'm sure. Can we start this conversation again? Because I don't want to be that person here, and have that open conversation. Go, this is the way I feel about work. I don't want to bring it home, because you don't want it to destroy that. Anger is that really, really important thing, and find ways to deal with anger. Some of those, and I'll put this one out there, forgiveness. Lots of people are reported as saying it, but I like saying Mandela said it best. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to get sick. As you're so resentful at your managers and your anger builds against them, they're having a Chardonnay. They don't care that you're resentful and angry on a Saturday night, but it's eating you up and destroying your family. And so remembering and resenting probably isn't as good as option as forgiving and forgetting. And so being able to find that. Now, forgiving doesn't mean actually, I'm not into cheap grace. Forgiving doesn't mean going, this wasn't something that was wrong. That doesn't need to be dealt with. But from a point of view, I'm going to process that and move to a position and go, I'm not out, if something's got to be progressed because it's an actual clear injustice, to be able to do that and not go, I'm going to get you back so bad. I'm going to think, okay, perhaps they didn't do it out of ill benefit. I've got to step out of that cycle and go, perhaps they haven't done it out of ill justice, but we're going to actually see that justice is done and not let it destroy you in the battle. One of my participants wrote in a book about someone whose child had been abused, and she had an outrage and a desire to see the right thing done that was tempered by reason and resolve, and to be able to bring that back. And so perhaps it's that patient that's really, really angry. You're angry at because they're a vocal anti-vaxxer. You're actually taking it on the last 10 or 20 anti-vaxxers that you've spoken to as well, and you're bringing all of that, and to be able to come back and take each decision on its own. One of the things in my parish ministry that I found really helpful way of understanding is this: when I turned up at my church, I'd come along and I'd make a mistake, and someone would kind of trip over it, like they're walking along the road, they trip over it, and then I'd do another one and they trip over that. And then after a number of years, the stones, they started piling them up on top of each other until there's this massive brick wall between us and them relationally, because everything that had happened, none of them were processed or dealt with in that particular way. And so perhaps if you can recognise some of the things that happen in a particular event in a day, recognise what went wrong, what's my part in it, how can I give perhaps the benefit of the doubt to this manager at this particular time and not let it destroy me. Find someone with whom you can discuss and debrief it, because sometimes actually talking about it is the best thing that we can kind of do. Resolve yourself to be you. Firewall yourself from all of your identity being involved in your job. Be that person that you want to be. Like I said, I could go all day. What else? What did I say right down here?
Something I found really helpful to manage resentment or anger or to prevent it is just understanding the concept of the fundamental attribution error in psychology, where you ascribe maliciousness to other people's behaviours or stupidity or laziness. So if I'm late for work, it's because the traffic was bad. If Adam's late for work, it's because he's disorganised or lazy. That's the assumption you make. You're giving it yourself. When someone else does something that ends up with a bad outcome that might affect you, you ascribe some kind of malice to it, where it was just luck to them as it could be luck to you if you caused it. And just basically accepting the fact, because it probably is a fact, that most people, most of the time, are trying to do their best, want the best. It kind of makes you more forgiving when things don't go your way.
If you're in charge of people as well, I know they bastardised us when we were at the police academy because that's what had been done to them. Don't do the negative things to the next people. I think the flip in communication, if you're managing people, because communication is so really clear from leaders as a real sticking point for people. Switch from just do as you're told, you don't need to know, to that context and have that discussion with your team. I will tell you the reason why I've made the decision unless I can't, and that's when I'm going to need to trust you and build up relational trust with those beneath you as well, because sometimes you can't change them above, but you can certainly change the lives of those beneath you in the food chain. And so you can be part of that solution for that next generation to go, there was a leader who listened to me, who sometimes he couldn't say the decisions, he or she couldn't tell me the reasons for their decisions, but more often than not they would. And to be able to have that time, just that extra, have you got any questions? Do you understand? Is there anything that you feel uncomfortable with? I mean, because you have stop points medically, don't you? You can go, stop. Perhaps that's the point relationally as well. Stop, hang on, something doesn't feel right here. That's something I'm playing with, that last idea. But and also recognition. One of the things I'm finding in my research that's really dangerous for people's well-being is giving them medals or giving other people medals, because why did I get it for this and not for that, and why come they didn't get one and how come he did get one, and that's really dangerous. But you can change from recognition to thankfulness, and small elements of thankfulness can be elements that are really, really important, and to break people and find things that you can be thankful that someone has done as well as resentful, because we get a perceptive set as well about a particular person, and we then don't see the good things that they do. And not everyone in management is a complete jerk all of the time. They quite often do things for which you can be thankful. find things for which you can be thankful as well and that can temper the way that we do that as well, and just having that balance as well. And that takes that time to sit back and reflect, and with someone in particular that you trust. And if that person that you trust, it gets beyond them, then seek some help from someone else. And that's why we've got the resources here for all of you as well. We've got psychological help, you've got chaplains, you've got peers. Seek out, reach out for help, and just talk. Why don't I call that a day?
Thank you very, very much.